Let's return now to the story of David Cameron's departure from Parliament. Will history praise him for his election victory and allowing gay marriage, or judge him for his EU referendum gamble? Well, joining me from Westminster is the political philosopher Phillip Blond, who is director of the think tank Respublica. He came up with the notion of red Toryism and is a former advisor to Mr Cameron. Very good evening to you. Sad to see him go?
Well, sad, but sad for different reasons. I think that he had enormous potential from 2008 to 2010. I thought finally he could create a genuine one-nation conservatism that was critical of capitalism, that healed the social wounds in our country. And indeed, that's what he spoke about. And I think the tragedy with David Cameron is he was unable to deliver on that. Some of that isn't his fault. He was dealing with a post-crisis, post-financial crisis situation. And in many ways, he and George Osborne did save the economy and produce the type of growth that has really approached almost full employment in the UK.
Well, but that's exactly the point, isn't it? Don't you think that he couldn't deliver on the big idea, the big change that might have cemented his political legacy because he had to deal with that financial crisis and hold a politically difficult coalition together?
I think that's all true. He did indeed hold successfully together the coalition government. He saved us from much of the fate that befell the continent. But really, I would argue that the task that fell to him and that he argued for, which was transforming conservatism, make it speak to the poor, to the excluded, to those who didn't have a chance. And I judge him really by the beginning and the end of his tenure, both as leader of the opposition and prime minister, because I think that's how history will judge him. The very people that he said he'd speak to that unfortunately weren't spoken to, weren't really engaged with, were the ones who voted for Brexit, those who feel excluded culturally and economically, and they are the people who voted for Brexit and ended his career. So what I'm sad about really is the opportunity that was lost. We had a legacy in formation, if you will, if you go back and read the speeches of 2008 to 2010. This was a legacy that, if it was fulfilled, would have been transformative, and I think it was unfortunately squandered. Not all of that is his fault, and the government did a great deal of good, but really it's the failure to deliver on one nation conservatism that really we haven't had a conservative fulfill since Disraeli in the 19th century. I think that actually really marked his end.
James Kirkett, writing in the Telegraph tonight, said in between breaking his promise not to resign as PM and breaking his promise not to resign as an MP, the only significant official work he undertook was drawing up an honours list, handing an OBE to his wife's stylist and a knighthood to his press officer. Why was he one of those politicians that some in the right love to hate?
Well, I think some on the right love to hate him because he tried initially to do something different, and I would support that. And I think his critics argued he was a sphinx without a riddle, i.e. he was a man who didn't really believe in anything. And I don't think that's true. I think he believed in things quite deeply and was moved by things. But unfortunately, I think he lacked the conceptual rigour to pursue it. He lacked the stamina and intellectual persistence that's required. You have to lead as a leader, not just pragmatically, but if I can put it like this, conceptually. You have to lead through your ideas. And the tragedy of David Cameron, think of the tragedy of the big society, is all of his own ideas that the country really desperately needed were allowed to gently fade away. And it was really George Osborne who led the ideas side, the decisive ideas side of the government. And actually, to his credit, and also, of course, to David Cameron's credit, they produced great economic gain, but not the legacy that would have spoken to the people who, as I've already said, voted for Brexit. So for me, the legacy of Cameron is really a tragedy, and he'll be remembered not for what happened in the middle. He'll be remembered for who he didn't speak to and the consequences of that, which was losing the European referendum.
Allies have suggested that he didn't want to be a backseat driver, this idea of being a distraction. But really, for him, do you think the writing was on the wall? He saw the unpicking of his policies, that long, slow wooing of the Chinese, exploded in the Hinkley Point delay, grammar schools returning, threatening free schools and the extension of academies that he had overseen. You know, was he effectively seething, do you think?
No, I mean, were they his policies? I mean, a lot of the policies that are being unpicked were George Osborne's policies, and Osborne came belatedly to the one nation politics that we needed much earlier, the Northern Powerhouse, for example. And it's really hard to see which policies, as it were, Cameron held close to his heart. I mean, arguably, and I would argue this, that one of the best things about him is he let his ministers innovate. He let Michael Gove innovate around free schools. He let Ian Duncan Smith really try to make welfare reform work. And that's, I think, praiseworthy. But where I think he fell down is he provided conceptual leadership at the beginning of his premiership. Remember Broken Britain. Remember the attempt to heal the social cultural wounds of our country through, for example, big society. And remember how that was allowed to drop. And in the end, he became somebody who was just pragmatic. And if you're pragmatic in a time of when everything's going well, it doesn't really matter. But if you're pragmatic in a time when actually things aren't going well, people feel that you don't care about them because you haven't shaped policies around them and for them. And that, again, is why he lost the European referendum.
Amazing how quickly it feels like old history, doesn't it? But Philip Blond, good to have you on. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.